We are at Corpus Christi College, Cambridge, in the context of the After Science and Religion colloquium, with Professor Emeritus John Milbank from the University of Nottingham, who was the Professor of Religion, Ethics and Politics at the university, and main figure of the radical orthodoxy current within Anglo-Catholicism and British academia and worldwide. So thank you very much for accepting.
No, pleasure, Sωτήρης.
May I ask you, concerning your one of your most important books, Theology and Social Theory, which regrettably has not yet been translated into Greek, most people would think that there is an unenlightened time of religion, but then enlightenment came, and then the social sciences would come and from a neutral viewpoint, from a neutral perspective, dissect, as it were, religion and explain it. I understand that your viewpoint is quite different. What would that be?
Well, my viewpoint would be that the social sciences are not simply innocent and neutral with respect to religion or the topic of theology, and that if you trace the way they came into being, their genealogies, you actually discover that they have quite specific theological viewpoints or else anti-theological viewpoints, and that these are constitutive of their programs, that they either have buried theological outlooks or deliberately anti-theological outlooks, being part of the whole point of the enterprise. So to see these as bodies of neutral inquiry would be very naive. That's the main thesis of the book.
If I understand correctly, you also see the secular social theory perspective as deriving from theology, from a bad theology, as
yes.
you say. How is that?
Well, I think, for example, if we think in terms of the main discourses of politics and their liberal assumptions and their individualist assumptions, these are profoundly linked to ideas of a God primarily defined by his will, and so we're seen as being in that image, also defined by particular ideas of the fall, sometimes Protestant, but sometimes counter-Reformation, that see the fall as leading to a total depravity. So the idea is that human beings in a state of nature are just frightened of each other, that they can't come to any agreement. So agreement is only achieved through contract, so that the most fundamental layer, if you like, of modern social political assumptions, liberalism, I think, is originally considerably defined by a certain kind of theology. And then when it comes to economics, I think that the whole idea of a hidden hand, the idea of producing order out of chaos instead of producing order out of an ethicized economy. So I think, again, the idea that economics is not fundamentally ethical is perhaps surprisingly, again, defined by a certain kind of theology, that a providential order substitutes for human ethics. Again, there's this background of a sense of depravity. And then when it comes to sociology, there is a legacy through so-called theological occasionalism, the idea that the social order, the social totality somehow stands above history because it is originally, it's a divinely imposed order, almost a revealed order. So that what was actually a reactionary philosophy gets inverted into the idea that the essence of religion is social. Yes. So that when we're worshipping God, we're really worshipping the society. And what we don't realize is that this is a kind of inverted theology. And then the other tradition would be the Hegelian Marxist dialectical tradition, and it's more well known that that is a secularization of a certain kind of immanent theology. So that I think if one questions those bad theologies behind these pictures, and one asks oneself instead what would emerge from a good theology, I think the whole secular framework starts to become questionable if we see that it's ironically built upon certain closures against God established by theology itself in the first place, which in the end leads to a kind of nihilism and despair. And if we want to reject that, then we have to reconsider the more positive theologies and the idea that our social structures and political structures are inherently ethical, are groping towards reflecting the eternal good, even though we have to live within processes of time. And without that sense of eternal justice, how do we make sense of law? And how do we make sense of justice unless we've got the idea that it's somehow pointing towards a pacification of human relations, a coming together in harmony? And if we believe that's real and possible, that must be to do ultimately with what the Christians call the beatific vision.
And how would you summarize the political repercussions of your counter-proposal, if I may say so?
The political repercussions of my counter-proposal are very much that we need to recover, albeit in a new guise, classical and medieval understandings of the political order, that it needs to be about a search for the common good, about how we live together in relation. It needs to be something like an idea of citizen self-rule. I think that in modern times we've become isolated bourgeois people, and politics has become something technical and professional. And the very idea of the state really needs to be dismantled. We need to recover a sense that in all our life, social and economic life, we're involved in political participation. And the question is, how do you have that sense in something much bigger than the Greek city-state? And I think here the notion of representation is crucial. Well, both the idea of the primacy of local communities and the idea that there have to be certain representatives mediating that to the centre. And I think that's linked to the constitutional idea that a just order is a blend of the one and the few and the many, the unity at the centre, the many individuals, and then the few mediating bodies at various levels, integrating the economic and the political, and the few in the sense of representatives. And in our own time, I think we're seeing a collapse both of liberalism and of the idea of representation, and we're getting increasingly populism, a sense of aggregated democracy that often seems to point towards a Caesar figure, a tyrannical figure, and that's bad as well. But so increasingly it seems to me that finding an alternative to that is tied into people with a more connected, with people with a more metaphysical, more religious vision, more prepared to see that we can try to come to some sort of agreement, and some agreement about patterns of distribution, because we do think that this is in some sense reflecting some sort of eternal order, that most societies have really been like this. Increasingly, we're disaggregated in terms of rights. We claim there are all sorts of competing rights, and this becomes the end of argument. People just assert rights and we don't know how to mediate